This is Nigel Hayward with Kiwo Ulano, and this is another video. It's a primer on RIPs and what RIPs do. Specifically today, I'm going to spend a short amount of time explaining what a RIP is, what it does, and how some of the settings work and how they affect print quality. So I guess the generic question is, what is a RIP? And I get asked this question a lot. The question I get asked a lot is what a RIP is, and do I need one? And most people seem to think that RIPs are a way of saving money. The necessary answer is that RIPs are an important part of making most printers work. Now, most printers, whether they're inkjet, thermal, CTS-based units, whether they use laser ablation, different types of laser technology, the file format that they understand is typically a rasterized format. What's a rasterized format? It's a bitmap. And if you look in a program like Photoshop, when we zoom in, we see tiny little pixels. Well, most printers, if not all, other than the vector-based pen plotters and so on, they use a rasterized file format. And in essence, they're scanning through a line of data, one pixel at a time, whether to turn it on or turn it off. And that's how, and that is the generic file format. Now, every single printer has its own unique way of doing things, but they all use a very generic rasterized format. What a RIP does is a RIP takes Illustrator files, Photoshop files, and files from design programs like those and CorelDRAW and so on, and converts them into these rasterized formats. And it uses a variety of different tricks and tools to control head speed, the size of the droplet that goes down, and so on. And we'll look at some of those features here. One of the questions I get all the time is, do I need a RIP? And the answer is yes, you do. Now, you may not know that you're using a RIP. You may have an Epson printer with a little Epson driver, but that Epson driver is in fact a RIP. It's converting file formats from design programs into a format, a rasterized format that the printer can handle. And we'll go through some of the features in the next 20-25 minutes. So the RIP I'm going to use here just to explain, I'll go through, is the Wasatch RIP. It could be any RIP. It could be the AccuRIP. It could be CADLink. It could be a high-end ESCO. They're all, in essence, in the same family. They just have a variety of different types of tools, workflow tools, more advanced control of printer tools, so on and so forth. So let's open up the Wasatch RIP, and this is 7.8, and they're currently on 8. Have yet to upgrade, but I will do that shortly. So we're going to go through a couple of different printers here. So the word RIP, what does it mean? Well, it means a raster image processor, and it's self-explanatory, raster being a bitmap, image, and processor. And like I said, they vary in complexity from just simple pass-through raster data to high-end ESCO, Rampage RIPs, Caldera RIPs that have sophisticated color management tools, workflow tools, the ability to drop in text, variable data, and I won't get into that today, but we'll get into some of the features that a RIP have. So in the Wasatch RIP, I actually have set up 2 printers. Let's open up a file real quick. Most RIPs will allow you to open up a file. I'll just open up a very simple internal file that they have here. It's a color file, and this is one that the Wasatch RIP has built into it. And so most RIPs will have an interface that allow you to do a variety of different things. They'll allow you to, say, crop an image. So just like in a design program, I can right click, I can zoom into the crop box. A lot of RIPs will allow you to rotate an image, and you're not really going to see this, but you'll see the green rotate counterclockwise 90 degrees. It'll allow you to mirror. It'll allow you to change the output. In this instance, you'll see that it's 0, it's about 5 inches, and if I do 200%, it will become 8 to 10 inches. So RIPs typically have fairly basic tools. Some of them, like the Wasatch RIP, have more advanced image manipulation tools. Other RIPs, like the Harlequin RIP, have 0 image manipulation other than basic mirroring, emulsion up, emulsion down, some scaling, but typically there is no image manipulation here in some of those RIPs. can also do a thing where I say restore original view, and I can delete the crop box. So, you know, most rips will have some form of image manipulation. So let's take a look at the setup for a particular printer. Now, if you look along the top, this particular rip has the option to run two printers concurrently. And the first one is a Roland RS640, which is a large format printer. And again, the specifics of the rip you don't need to know. It's just the generic format that they all have. So I'm going to go into the settings. And again, you don't need to know these windows other than this specific one. Now, all rips will have definitions for how they're going to print to a printer, which is why when you look at a printer, sometimes they print really slowly, sometimes they print really quickly, sometimes the resolution is really blurry, and sometimes the resolution is really high. It's all a function of the setup or the printer properties. Now, every rip uses its own nomenclature, but this specific rip is fairly self-explanatory, and you'll find a lot of the same terms in all of the various rips. So let's take a look at this one. So the first thing here is print mode. Print mode here means the resolution with which we print, and you'll see here we have a whole bunch of them. We have cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which is in essence the printer that we use. It is a CMYK printer. If it was a 6-color, it would say CMYK, light cyan, light magenta, or orange, green, and so on. We have two modes, color output and monochromatic output. Monochromatic being for film output, CMYK being for color output. I am currently selected this. The highest resolution I can do is 1400 by 1400 dpi. And so that means that in a 1 inch by 1 inch section, 1,440 pixels across, 1,440 pixels down. If we multiply that, we get the total number of pixels in that 1 inch by 1 inch section. So it's high resolution. Okay, so at 1440, that's the resolution that it's going to print. The next thing that we typically have a control over is print direction. In this one, we have unidirectional and print direction. Unidirectional means that typically a printer will print from the home position, which is typically on the right side of a printer, and it printing from right to left, but does not print in return. And typically you can tell a printer that's doing that because the return speed is much faster than the print speed. So the speed from right to left is a fixed speed, and then the return speed from left to right is usually a lot faster as it returns home. If it's bidirectionally printing, it will actually print the same speed going from left to right, right to left, or either right to left, left to right. So that's one way of telling that. Dot size. Now this is where it gets a little interesting. You'll notice here that we have names. We have a variable, which is for divot output. It's not for a fixed droplet output, i.e. for film. Usually we'll use variable for color, CMYK, but we have 3 different film droplet sizes. We've got a fixed small, fixed medium, and fixed large. Now Wasatch and other rips will vacillate somewhat on the nomenclature, and this is a little confusing. They just say fixed small, fixed medium, fixed large. On other printers, they'll actually specify a picoliter droplet size. So it will say 5 picoliter or 5 PL, or it'll say 8 PL, it'll say 16 PL, which is an actual picoliter droplet size. So fixed small here is a smaller droplet that goes down, which is typically something that we would use for higher resolution. Fixed medium is for mid resolution, and fixed large is a lot of ink going down. Usually we'll use that with a low resolution halftone or a low resolution print. So that's what that is. Again, there is no way of knowing what fixed small is other than if they specify it. And through a variety of printing and testing, that's how one works out the correct droplet size for the amount of ink that goes down. And this is one of the issues that people face when they're trying to make film or do output. They either flood the substrate, or they don't put down enough and they get frustrated and think it's something to do with the printer or something they're doing wrong, or it's a color adjustment, when in essence it's only to do with a droplet size. And by changing the droplet size, you can enact change and have a more accurate print. Okay, overprint. Now overprint here we have 1, 2, or 3. Overprint in essence is where the printer will go back over the last section, one scan line or one line within a scan line, and it will repeat, it will overprint on top of it, so it'll do two over it. We do that typically with certain types of substrates where we can't put down enough ink. We do not do that for film. We have one only with film. Otherwise, images start to get blurry, especially when we're trying to do a 65 line or an 85 line droplet. You typically don't want to do overprints unless the machine is incredibly accurate. And you do not use that for any laser type of output. Okay, pass count. Now, pass count is very, very interesting. Pass count relates to scan lines. Now, what in heaven's name is a scan line? Well, a scan line, if you look on a print, on an inkjet print, you'll notice that the head will go left to right or up and down, and it perseverates over a specific area. So what it's doing is it's building up a line of data. Typically a line of data can vary in size, but let's say a line of data is ½ an inch, and it will build up ½ an inch strips of data. Well, what it does is it will print that ½ an inch of scan line data using more or less passes. So in this instance, it's set to 16. Let's say it was set to 8. What that means is it would only use 8 passes to do that ½ inch. 16 would actually take 16 passes, and 32 would take 32 passes. So what that means is 32 is a lot slower than say 8. However, it's higher resolution, and you're going to lay down more ink. So if you can imagine it taking 32 passes with a specific dot size, it's going to lay down more ink. This is one of the ways that you can, one, improve resolution, but also lay down more ink and increase the density of a print. And again, the trade-off there is speed. And sometimes going up to a higher pass count doesn't necessarily give you higher resolution. So again, it is a fine line between testing, but typically the rule of thumb is the higher the pass count, the better the resolution, the higher the density. Okay, ink. Sometimes you don't have a control over this, but in this particular one, this printer can do an eco-soling and an FPG or pigment ink. Now, what does that mean? It means that the firing rate, i.e. the voltage that the head fires at, differs with eco-solvent ink because of the viscosity of the ink. The ink viscosity is thicker with solvent ink than it is with pigment, so you don't need to fire. The voltage is going to be a slightly lower voltage. Now, how is this useful? Well, if you're using pigment and you're having a problem laying down ink, and you've done everything you can actually change it to eco-solve. So have the head fire at an eco-solvent, so it'll have a higher voltage, and it will actually lay down more ink. And you can enact change in density, so you can get higher density that way. And I have used that with certain printers where we struggle to get higher resolution. Typically, though, we'll set it to pigment, even if we use an ink, dye-based. Okay, head speed. Typically, the head speed is physically what it is. So 608 is a function of an encoder strip. And there, on the machine itself, you'll see a strip of data hidden behind that the head references to fire droplets at a specific station on a strip. And the head speed is a function of that reference point. So the higher the head speed, the higher the voltage, and the faster it moves across that encoder strip. So typically with print heads on a printer like this, you'll try and keep the speed around 500. But on the larger format machines, the really big ones, they will print in the 1,000+ range. And again, you can tell with a smaller printer or a 54-inch printer and smaller, if the machine is moving too much, if it's jiggling, the head speed's too high. And that's something that you can point out to people. So typically you want to be in the 450 to 500-600 range and not any higher than that on a Roland or a Marquee. Otherwise you can actually damage the chassis and the print head over time. Feed speed. Feed speed is very, very cool. And not every, I'm going to set this to 5, not every printer or rip has this, but what feed speed is the interval in between passes, print passes. You'll notice that as it feeds the film out, sometimes you'll see it jerk the film forward, and some good rips will control that. You don't want to jerk it forward because that can give you inaccuracy in the print length and in the quality of the print. You want a nice, smooth movement. So it's a feed speed of around 5, will give you nice smooth movement of the media in between passes. And time between passes too, there's typically the Wasatch set to 0.1, but a lot of times when you're doing color output, there is an element of having to dry the media or allowing the ink to settle. So sometimes we'll increase that, but typically with film, because most film's microporous, it's instantly absorbed into the substrate. So it usually is set to a very minimal amount. Auto cut, you can have it set to whether or not you want it enabled or disabled. And the thing that's usually specific to a printer is a thing called IPC, or Intelligent Pass Control, and every printer will have one. You know, you'll see on the front of a rolling printer on a marquee, they'll say, you know, microweave or intelligent pass control or whatever. And usually it's proprietary to that particular device. But what it is, and we have it on some of our units, the digital units, CTS units, they have a microweave technique where they will actually stitch together passes. And within the pass, sometimes if you look at during a pass, you'll see like a wavy pattern. Typically it's horizontal, but it can be angled. And that's how it stitches together and it builds it up, and the pattern usually typically goes away when the pass count's done. And how it does it is by varying the voltage that goes down, and then it stitches them together at an angle to minimize banding and moire in a print. And that's IPC mode. And you know, usually they'll have higher or lower. The higher the pass count, the slower the print off. And sometimes it's a trade-off, and going to a higher one doesn't necessarily give you a good result. So let's go through a few other things. Media options. Usually it's printer control, but sometimes these rips will allow you to control the printer. We can set drying time if we're doing color output. We can change the head height. Although typically on a machine like this, the head height is a manual adjustment, but Epson printers will allow you to electronically adjust the height. So that's where that would come in. And feed calibration will allow you to adjust how the machine is fed through the feed control during the print. So if media is usually slippy and slidey, we can make an adjustment here to make a print more accurate. So if it's coming out short, we can do a positive adjustment. So in this instance, I'd say use feed calibration. And if I did a positive adjustment, it would mean that I'm stretching it. If I do a negative adjustment, it means that I'm shrinking it on a print. Typically, though, you can do that on the printer, and I would suggest that you do it on the printer. And there's a specific reason for that. When it's done on the printer, it means that the printer itself is not distorting the image. It means that the printer is giving us an absolute print. So if it's coming out short, 1/4 inch, and we do an absolute adjustment, it will make sure that the image on the printer is coming out on its raster image the correct length. And what it's not doing is taking a halftone or an image and stretching it to fit. So it's scaling up everything within that image area. If I do it on the rip, it's actually stretching it so we can get elongation of halftones. So it's usually not a good idea to do that. Okay, advanced. Usually most rips will allow you to redirect output. So specifically for monochromatic output, we can do a thing called make separations, where we send over a CMYK file or CMYK in spot colors. We can allow the rip to separate that out individually. So we're sending over an RGB image or a CMYK 4-color image like the one we had on the screen, and we're allowing the rip to make those separations. Make negative is what it says it is. If we have a film making a film positive, typically a good rip will allow you to make a negative. And these particular channels here, K, C, and Y, what they're for is for if we're doing monochromatic output, and typically they're grayed out if we're doing C and YK. But if we're having an issue with a particular printer and we have black, and we change to a different head, so we put black cartridges in, say, the cyan, because the black head isn't printed properly, we can redirect the black output through the magenta head. And so in essence, we've got redundancy built in here. And if we have 4 heads on a printer, and we're just making film, we could actually use the heads until they die, go to the next head, so on and so forth. And again, heater control. Most of these, if the printer has a heater, a good rip will have heater controls. Okay, another quick thing here that I want to take a quick look at too is how we select halftones. And you look on this particular screen, we have a lot of information. It's very, very confusing. But the one thing that I wanted to just show you really quickly is that most RIPs will allow you to specify the type of screening that you're going to do, whether it's CTS, whether it's film, whether it's thermal. So in the Wasatch, we have the ability to say, let's say, generate a 45 line halftone. I can specify 3 sets of angles here, and there is a way of specifying a different type of angle, but let's say that the more generic one here is the 37, 67, or the 62, 7.5, 22.5. So yeah, that would be the one I would normally use. And we have a bunch of different settings here. We have a round up, a Euclidean round, Euclidean ellipse, and 60, 40, 70, 30, and a simple round. So the difference between those three is the Euclidean typically relates to maintaining the same amount of negative and positive space during the transition. That may be beyond this particular video, but in essence, we're trying to maintain the same amount of space when we go through a negative to a positive space. So you'll notice when we do a print, sometimes you get a checkerboard pattern, and that's when we transition from negative to positive space, so i.e. more ink, less ink. And Euclidean round Euclidean ellipses tend to have that checkerboard pattern in there. The simple one, however, doesn't. It uses a thing called AG for balance screening, and you will not see a checkerboard pattern in there. But that's usually for flexo printing around that. And 60/40 means that the space is usually, so we take a dot, 40% of it, the dot is elongated. So if we take a little square, it's elongated to 60% of the space is black, 40% isn't. And it's simple, and 70/30, 70% of the space is black, 30% isn't, and it maintains that through the transition. All right, so that's how we can generate halftone setting. One other quick thing, I apologize, let me go right back to it. There's a thing called ink reduction. Okay, so one of the questions I get, and I go on about it with the guys, is ink reduction. If you want to make film, or even if you want to do XTS, CTS units, you have to have some type of control over laser, over ink, over thermal. You have to have some way of adjusting the amount or the intensity of what you're doing. A poor CTS unit has no controller, has no laser controller, or has no way of calibrating it. Thermal devices that don't allow you to control, say, a thing called hysteresis are not good devices. And a good RIP for an inkjet will allow you to control the amount of ink that goes down on a substrate. Typically, you may not have control over the substrate or the type of ink that you've got, but one thing that you should have control of is whether or not you flood a substrate or have the ability to dial it back. That's what ink reduction is. Or on a laser-based system, the ability to calibrate a laser, change the intensity down so that you can get a more accurate laser spot. And the same with thermal. If it's too much energy is going down and there's no control over the hysteresis, you'll get dot blossoming and you'll get puckering in the substrate. Things don't fit. So it's the same thing here. And this is not affecting tonal values. What it is if we look on a square, or a solid area of the output, is it wet? Is it dry? If it's wet, it means that we're putting down too much ink, which means we need to use a thing called ink reduction. And on a laser system, if we're getting weird angle patterns, that means that we're not putting down enough energy, or we're putting down too much energy, and we have to dial that back in. Okay, so that's ink reduction. Another feature of a good RIP is the ability to adjust it. And if I click on correction curves, you'll notice here that I get a proxy of the image. And a good RIP will allow you to dial in colors. So if I move the curve, you'll notice that the image changed. If I wildly change the cyan, you'll notice that the image changes. So if I also go back and do the same thing for the magenta, a good RIP will give you some kind of channel management. for individual colors. We can do it for all colors too. So a good rip will also allow you to enter values to make specific adjustments. So in this particular instance, if I want to bump or make an adjustment to say the 50%, I would put in the same values for everything else because I don't want to make any changes. And on the 50, let's say I want to make it lighter or darker. Let's say I put in 60. And you'll notice when I go in 62.5, 75, I don't make adjustments to those because I don't want to change those. I just want to make an adjustment to the black, the 50%. If I click on it, you'll notice it gives me my little adjustment there for the 50% only. And if I put my mouse cursor over that, it should give me in at 50 out of 42. What does that mean? It means that it's pulling it back down to 40. Now that is not a 10% adjustment. That's 10 points on 50. So 10 percentage of 50, actually 10% of 50 is 5. So that's a 20% adjustment, 10%. And hopefully that makes sense to you. So it's a mathematical thing. If we're going down from 50 to 40, it's not a 10% bump, it's a 20%, because 10% of 50 is 20%. Okay, so that would be that. Now that is a basic overview of the settings. Another feature of a RIP would be the ability to nest images. And let's say we've got, I'll pull up just some files here and dump them in. If we give it this a second, hopefully it doesn't crash. The RIP itself will allow me, a good RIP will have nesting capability. It will allow me to nest images and get a more efficient use of the substrate. And another feature of a good RIP is queue management. So we have the ability to have files that have been ripped and then files that we know have already been processed on the right hand side. So you can see here I have a bunch of files that I did in the past. Let me see if that's if I double click on it, and I'll notice a proxy of the file comes up, and it was printed Tuesday, July 9th, which would have been last year, and at 11:56 a.m. And if I wanted to reprint that, I could do one copy, click on OK, and it would reprint it. So a good RIP would actually have a record of files that we've already printed. Okay, so that's a very quick basic overview of a RIP. In this instance, the specific RIP is the Wasatch RIP. Hopefully, if you take what I've said and apply that to other RIP, doesn't matter what it is, it can be a $50,000 RIP or a RIP that's $50. They all have some aspect of some of the things that I've talked about today. And if you have any questions, send me an email or contact me on my cell, and I'm happy to answer them. Have a great day. See ya.